Hello, this is Mark Tantum, Global Head of Consulting for Ince. And thank you very much for tuning into this webinar, which is the second in our series of private wealth webinars. The first, hopefully you already heard, which was about entrepreneurs. Today we're looking at family issues. And I want to, first of all, introduce our illustrious panel. First of all, we have Susan Williams, partner in charge of the family department in Cardiff. Secondly, Kerry Graham, who's partner in charge of the family department in Bristol. Third, Andrew Williams, the managing associate in the private clients team in Bristol. And last, but by no means least, Roger Harding, who's a tax director in London. And we thought to bring this to life, we would look at a particular case study, which is a fictional case study, which involves my fictional family. But I'll ask each of the panelists around this particular issue, and it will be very timely because it'll be about the current crisis. So firstly, I'd like to ask Susan, I have one of my children, fictional children, I hasten to add, that just before lockdown decided that she would move in with her boyfriend, but it could be a son and his girlfriend, doesn't have to be one or the other, but let's say it's my daughter here, went into lockdown with her boyfriend and is now cohabiting with him during this time. Susan, what would you say would be the issues that I should be speaking to her about that may come out of this new situation for her?
That's a very important question. One of the consequences of the government announcing that there was to be a national lockdown from the 24th of March 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 crisis was that couples who were in a relationship but living separately had to make a snap decision as to whether they were going to move in with one another or whether they were going to self-isolate in their own homes, which meant that they were in different households and therefore couldn't interact with each other. And so many couples have made that snap decision and took a leap of faith and have now been residing with each other, at least for the last 5 weeks or so. It was a short-term solution to a public health crisis, but now is the time for couples to be able to start to look at what they're going to do in the long term, because there are going to be financial consequences of them moving in with one another, and if they decide to continue living with one another once the lockdown restrictions start to be eased. So I'm often asked, what should they be thinking about? And really, there are 2 documents that they really need to put their mind to. The first is a cohabitation agreement, and this is a document which will set out what their financial circumstances are as they start their period of living together, what will happen during the relationship, and then what will happen at the end of their relationship if it sadly comes to a conclusion. The second document is a will, and the will ties very closely into a cohabitation agreement because it deals with the individual's circumstances in the event of their death, and the will can also cover issues as to who is going to act as guardian for the children. So these 2 documents provide a comprehensive wraparound package that can be tailored to the couple's individual personal circumstances. I'm also often asked what, in fact, the cohabitation agreement would cover. What would it include? And it includes all sorts of things, not trivial matters as to who's going to do the washing up, but big important things such as who owns the property, who is going to pay the mortgage or the rent, and how the household bills are going to be divided between the 2 of them. It'll also look at what they're going to do with assets that they acquire during the relationship. What are they going to do if they inherit any money from other family members as they progress through their relationship? The document will also then look very closely at how they're going to deal with the end of the relationship, who's going to get what, how the assets are going to be divided. Who's going to keep the pets? How are they going to look at child maintenance? Those sort of issues. And the whole purpose of the cohabitation agreement is to avoid conflict, to avoid expensive legal costs, and to provide a route plan really for couples when they're facing very difficult circumstances. So those are the sort of issues from a family perspective that ought to be discussed with your fictional family.
Just reflecting on what you said, Susan, I wondered whether I should have actually included a clause about who does the washing up in my marital agreement. But let's move swiftly on from that. And you picked up something that I thought people would have already thought about, which was their will. But I understand, Andrew, that in fact, the large percentage of people haven't actually thought about their will. Just wondered if you could give us some background about what they should be doing if they haven't yet done so.
Yes, absolutely. Approximately 60% of the UK population doesn't have a will, which will mean that they will die intestate. And as a consequence of that, the law steps in on their death and will dictate what will happen to their estate. So the benefits of having a will are certainty, not only for you, but for your family, the ability to ensure that your estate passes to your loved ones. And as Susan has mentioned, if you have children, appointing testamentary guardians for them, ensuring that their inheritance is placed in an appropriate trust structure until they're in a position to inherit that share of your estate. And it's particularly pertinent for cohabiting partners, because if you die without a will, then your surviving cohabiting partner has no automatic rights under the intestacy rules, which will mean that they'll find themselves in a very invidious position, then having to make a claim against their late partner's estate for reasonable financial provision. And this means that they will then effectively be suing other family members. So that the certainty of having a will in place will ensure that your wishes prevail upon your death. And also the benefits of putting a will in place are that you can claim the appropriate inheritance tax allowances and reliefs. Many long-standing cohabitees perhaps ought to consider marriage because of its tax efficiency. And this is something I'm sure that Roger will be able to elaborate on.
I guess one of the features of this terrible illness is that it seems to afflict young people as well as old people, and therefore the issue of wills at the moment should be current in people's minds. But as you said, tax is another issue. Roger, would you like to outline the sort of tax issues that may arise either for cohabitees or for people who are married?
Yeah, sure, Mark. As you know, I'm a great fan of tax planning, and as Andrew has alluded to, if you haven't got a will, you haven't got a plan. Under the current system, the current disaster, I should say, of the disease, children inheriting now could be inheriting wealth a lot earlier than envisaged, and so we need to look at the potential tax charges for the deceased parents and for them going forward. Couples, as you know, can inherit assets between themselves free of inheritance tax, and they can have quite modest assets that would still be chargeable to inheritance tax because the nil rate band has now been frozen at 325,000 for more than 10 years. So we've lost a lot of ground there. Married couples, as I mentioned, inherit not from each other tax-free, but unfortunately for unmarried couples, they're not as lucky. There isn't a tax break for them. And so marriage is probably a good tax plan, as unmarried couples can be falling foul of capital gains rules as well as inheritance tax charges. To my mind, tax efficient investing is a must in any relationship. And it should be noted that at the moment pension funds can be inherited tax-free where they're not used, which is something that could be considered. On the capital gains front, assets are now in the current market at a very low value. So there is potential for making gifts to family members without a charge to capital gains tax to reduce the estate perhaps. Whilst there is a 7-year wait tail for inheritance tax, you could think about using debt to minimize the value because you're taxed on the net value of that asset. And debt, as we know at the moment, is very cheap. For those that have got corporate structures with assets within them that they've used for inheritance tax planning, they may be paying the annual tax on envelope dwellings. It could be a good opportunity now to get the asset out of the corporate structure on a relatively low capital gains charge, if any at all, and then not pay the ATED going forward. Trusts are always a good plan for, particularly for wealthy families, because then the assets stay out of anyone's estate. They're in an inheritance tax regime of their own. And of course, trusts protect the beneficiaries in the case of divorce, which I'm sure Kerry could run another webinar on at another time.
Yeah, coming to you, Kerry. I think you did a session with people just before we went into lockdown in Bristol about these sorts of issues, and also the bank of mum and dad. What were the sort of areas that you covered in that session and that came up as questions from the floor?
Well, the seminar we had in Bristol was in conjunction with Private Client, and really the issues were predominantly the position that parents find themselves in when they loan significant amounts of money to their sons or daughters without any form of protection. It arose from an article in a local newspaper that we did, and we had 2 or 3 inquiries from parents who were incredibly worried about the outcome should their sons or daughters then relationships fail. So essentially it was how to protect parents' loans, be it loans or gifts, and rising from that the issue of cohabitation agreements and how that can be built into in terms of protection. Also flowing from that were the tax consequences and wealth planning for parents who significantly have paid large sums of money for deposits and other property purchases.
Were there any areas that came as questions that you think are very timely for the present crisis?
In terms of cohabitation agreements, which predominantly, certainly in practice in Bristol, have come inquiry-wise from parents, cohabitation agreements are not very well known of, but they deal with the practicalities of a relationship, and they also deal with the practicalities of a relationship which then ends. I think no one likes to talk about a relationship ending, but it's prudent from the start of the relationship when you're entering into a cohabitation agreement to sit down and think about those things. And that in itself will protect a parent who has loaned a significant amount of money for a deposit.
Excellent. Andrew, just coming back to you for a second. Clearly we're in a state of lockdown, and as I understand it, wills have to be witnessed, which can't be done electronically, it has to be physically. Is there any problem with actually getting wills finalised at the moment with lockdown happening and social distancing?
Well, no, because our lawyers are working remotely. We can take instructions from our clients using a variety of means, including Skype, Zoom, Teams, and FaceTime. We can prepare the documents, send them to them via email for their agreement and also in the post. And then when the documents are ready for execution, we can guide them through that process, which will involve respecting the social distancing regime. So wills can be executed, for example, in the front or rear garden, in a communal setting, for example, in a park, on different benches, and even through a window.
So, Susan, we've heard from both you and Kerry talking about developing cohabitation agreements. Just so that people know, are there any other teams with similar capabilities around the country?
Yes, I mean, obviously, Kerry and I are based in Bristol and Cardiff, and therefore we have the capabilities of dealing with the cohabitation agreements from our bases. However, across the group, there are also offices in London that are equally able to deal with any inquiries in relation to cohabitation agreements in their family teams, and obviously their private client teams would deal with any wills and trusts issues.
Finally, Roger, from your side, you clearly are very skilled in this area of tax. Nationally, should people be coming to you where they have these issues of estate planning from a tax standpoint?
Yes, please do, because early planning is the thing to do. You can't get much sympathy from HMRC if you've done something and they've charged you a tax, and then you say, well, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. You need to take the advice beforehand and not after it, particularly with trusts. I mean, I've known lots of very excellently skilled trusts in terms of tax planning, and yet the beneficiaries and the family don't get on very well, and so it doesn't work very well. So you need to take the proper advice as to what you actually want to achieve before executing anything.
So thank you very much, all of you, for the overview around this difficult area of the law at a particular difficult time for us. What I'd like to do from each of you, ask you very short order to share with us the one point that you think we should be raising with our clients at this time in this area. So first of all, you, Susan.
Ask them how they're going to deal with their relationship coming out of lockdown. Do they think it is a long-term relationship? And if so, consider a cohabitation agreement.
Andrew?
If you don't have a will, make one. If you have one, review it, so that it takes into account your changing personal and financial circumstances and remains tax efficient, because marriage will revoke any existing will.
Roger?
Take the tax advice before you do any transactions, because they're very difficult to undo once you've done them.
Finally, Kerry.
I think with the of human relationships, there's a significant focus on the personal rather than the financial. And I think the coronavirus has shown us in a sad but very dramatic fashion that none of us are immortal. So we need to have a good hard look at our finances, get a will, get a cohabitation agreement, and look at things generally.
Wonderful. So thank you very much, Susan, Kerry, Andrew and Roger. Thank you very much for your views, your opinions and the advice that you've given, which I'll make sure I pass on to my son and daughter, fictional as they are. And for those people who've listened to this and hopefully enjoyed it and taken some ideas away from it and what you can pick up with your clients, as I said, there was a previous one on entrepreneurs, which if you haven't listened to it, I hope you'll do so afterwards, similar format to this and hopefully relevant to the crisis that we're going through at the moment. So all it leaves me to do is to wish you all well, stay healthy, and I look forward to seeing you in the office as soon as we come out of lockdown. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.